My name is Nicole. I'm a producer for the Remembering Them podcast. The podcast is a platform for people to share stories and memories of their loved ones who have passed away. The podcast was created in memory of Dad, Bob Cecil. May he rest in peace. Your host, Mark, Ryan, and Luke acknowledge the rich history and importance of storytelling within the indigenous culture.
My name is Jorgi Skiing, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet here today. Today we're meeting in Mianjin, and those traditional owners are the Yagara and Turrbal people. And I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge my people, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and extend that acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening in today.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the podcast. Solo episode with Mark today. Unfortunately, Luke and Ryan cannot join the meeting today, so just myself on this solo recording. Date of release will be Wednesday the 10th in Australia. That is Wednesday the 10th of June, which is World Pet Memorial Day, which is why the guys can't join us today. They're off remembering pets that they have lost in the past. So, as a recognition to those guys. So, looking forward to having you back, Luke and Ryan, to the next one. So, you're stuck with me today for a solo recording. So, no clues for the guessing game because we don't have anyone here with me to guess where our guest is from. So, straight into a bit of a bio. Our guest today is a journalist, author, and speaker who somehow balances deadlines, storytelling, 2 kids, a dog, and husband, all while finding time for cooking, horse riding, and dancing in the Isles of Woolies. She's funny, refreshingly real, and not afraid to share life's quirks, including the fact that she's had a bald patch on her head, affectionately named Captain Winky. That might be talked about in our Patreon chat. From Perth in Western Australia, here in Australia, is Casey Beros. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the podcast. Mark here on a solo recording today. Luke and Ryan, unfortunately, can't make today's recording with our guest. So today, date of release, Wednesday, the 10th of June, is World Pet Memorial Day, which is why the guys can't be with us today. They're off remembering pets of the past, and we're yet to have someone on the podcast talking about a pet. So we look forward to that day eventually, and feel free to reach out if you do have a story of a pet you would like to remember and talk to us about. So that's where the guys are today. No guessing game because it is just me, but our guest, I can tell you, is from Perth here in Western Australia. And Perth, for those that don't know, Perth is a sun-soaked coastal city known for its pristine beaches, mining wealth, relaxed lifestyle, and remarkable isolation from other major world cities. Our guest today is a journalist, author, and speaker who somehow balances deadlines, storytelling, 2 kids, a dog, and a husband, all while finding time for cooking, horse riding, and dancing in the Isles of Woolies, which is a local supermarket, grocery chain here in Australia. She's funny, refreshingly real, and not afraid to share life's quirks, including the fact that she's had a bald patch on her head, affectionately named Captain Winky. Our guest today from Perth in Western Australia is Casey Beros. So welcome to the podcast, Remembering Them podcast officially, Casey. Thank you very much for joining us from the other side of the country, sometimes all over the other side of the world. It seems that far apart, Perth and the East Coast.
Yeah, it does. We're our own little country over here in the West.
Yes, but beautiful. I have been there and loved Perth, loved Rottnest, did all of those things. So it's a beautiful part of the country / the world. So highly recommend anyone that hasn't been there to get over to Perth.
Yes, come visit, please. I spent 15 years in Sydney, so I love Sydney. I love the East Coast, and I miss it terribly. But Perth is its own sort of special brand of magic, so I'm really enjoying being here too.
Well, thanks for working out the slow. There's a time difference, which some people, international listeners, might not realize as well. A couple of
Yeah.
hours time difference. It is another world away if you fly over. But thanks very much for giving up your time, Casey. If you'd like to jump straight in and tell us who we're talking about today, the relationship to you, and what happened to that special loved one.
Yeah, so I suspect we'll be talking about my dad. My dad, his name was Jack, and about 5 years ago, I got a call saying that he had been diagnosed with mesothelioma. So, for people listening who don't know what that is, it's cancer from exposure to asbestos, and it is fatal, incurable, rapidly progressing, real bad news. And we were told that he would have 6 to 12 months, and we ended up getting 2.5 years with
Oh,
him,
wow.
during which I didn't realize that I was called this at the time, but I became his primary carer, certainly his advocate, and, somewhere nestled in there also got to be his daughter, and soaked up all of this beautiful, magical time that I wouldn't have had otherwise living on the other side of the country. So I feel really, really grateful to have had that opportunity, and also grateful to get to talk about him. He died 2.5 years ago, and it's pretty rare that we still get to, have this sort of open forum where we get to talk about this person that meant so much to us. So I'm grateful for that.
Oh, thanks, Casey. We love part of that with the podcast that I guess it's a common theme that we get from people that being thankful to be able to continue to talk about their loved ones, whether it's 2 years or 20 years down the track, to be able to share stories and memories of them. So we're grateful having you on and hearing about Jack. How old was he when he passed away? And then I guess around the asbestos, did he work with how
Good,
did that come
good
about? Yeah.
question. He was 68 when he passed away, so pretty young, too young, in
Mm.
my opinion. And he so we have a big asbestos mine over here in WA. It's been closed down for some time, but after it had been closed down from being a functional mine site, it was still open for visitors, and he went there on school camp. So that was his only
Wow.
exposure when he was, I think, 15 or 16, and then almost 50 years later, almost to the day, was when he became so symptomatic that he sought analysis or assessment, I suppose I should say, for those symptoms, and that's when he was diagnosed. So yeah, it's quite a rare cancer, but we do have over here in Western Australia, we do have a much higher incidence and prevalence because of that history, that mining history over here.
Yeah, I guess something that jumps to mind to me were there other people in his class that you're aware of, or not sure if they were
Yes.
also exposed? And yeah,
Yep. So there were, and there is it's a pretty well established litigation. I don't think you would call it a class action, although I may be totally wrong on that. But there certainly has been so much of it occur that there is now like a fairly well trodden funding pathway for people to get some compensation if they were exposed in that manner, because I suppose the argument is that we knew by then that that people shouldn't be anywhere near it, and the fact that they were, especially at such a young and tender age. And my dad specifically said, I remember crawling through the mine shaft and throwing rocks of asbestos at each other. So it's not that they just sort of, went and looked from
walked
the
past. Yeah,
outside. I
yeah,
think that they were pretty in there. And so, yes, there were a number of people in his cohort from that school lots who were exposed, but quite a few for whom that also translated to disease. So yeah, it's a
yeah,
real shame,
yeah.
actually.
And then what were the symptoms when he, so many years later? How did they show up? And then what was his digression in health over, that 2 and a bit years where, as you said, 6 to 12 months was the expected time frame.
Yeah, so mesothelioma is called mesothelioma because it occurs in the mesothelium, which is the lining of the organs. And the most common site to get it is in the pleura, which is the lungs, kind of the outer. If you imagine sort of a fishnet stocking covering our lungs, it's sort of the outer region of the lungs, from what I understand. And that was where Dad's was, and so his symptom really was breathlessness. So pain and breathlessness are the two kind of big symptoms, and it was really breathlessness for him. So I remember he had a younger girlfriend at the time, which was often the case for Dad. And he went to the pool to swim a few laps. He was like, right, I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to feel good. And he was one of those people who kind of always looked athletic, regardless of how little athletics he actually did. But for him, he was like, okay, I'm getting older. I've got this younger girlfriend. I want to feel good about myself. And so he had gone to the pool to swim some laps. And whilst he was, kind of unfit for him at that point, he had swum to Rottnest. We do a big swim to Rottnest every year, which is many, 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 many kilometres for people who are listening. So he had previously been a relatively good swimmer in order to be able to achieve that goal. So he said that when he got in the pool and he swum 150-metre lap, he said by about halfway he was really struggling. And by the time he got to the end, he said he was gasping for breath. And he thought, this is not just, oh, I'm a bit unfit. There's something significantly wrong here. And so he went to his GP, got a referral for a scan. And he said that when he was at the scan, the radiographer said to him, have you ever been exposed to asbestos? And he said he knew immediately that was bad news. He didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but he knew that it was bad news. And then mesothelioma is one of those cancers that isn't super straightforward to diagnose. So there was about 1 week to sort of get the diagnosis of mesothelioma, and then another probably week or two where we were working out exactly what type. There's different types depending on which cell it's in, and so and one is kind of worse news than the other. So it's quite intricate and complicated to get that diagnosis. So it took a little while to get the definitive diagnosis, and then look, to be really honest with you, the first probably 2 years or maybe 18 months is probably better. The sickest that he was from the treatment. So he had combined chemotherapy and immunotherapy, and he was only able to have 2 rounds of that. And he was so sick from side effects that he was on a clinical trial and they had to pull him off of it because his side effects were so bad. So the sickest actually that he wasn't from the disease, it was from the treatment. And then after that, he sort of bounced back for a little while, but then it was really only in the last, I'd say 6 to 9 months that his actual care needs really ramped up. And so prior to that, I had just been, his chaperone, his advocate, his second set of eyes and ears, and his daughter, spending as much time with him as humanly possible. And then it was really only in those probably last 6 to 9 months that his care needs really ramped up. And that was, that was a different experience. Yeah. Feeling that sort of pendulum swing from he's my dad to now he's somebody who I'm in charge of caring for. That's a tough pill to swallow for any child, I think, as you know all too well.
Was that loss of function? Casey, that you had to...
Yeah, it was loss of function, but it was also the part of this that I don't think people talk about enough is that the physical side of care is really hard. So you are trying to be like an advocate, maybe a power of attorney or executor, you've got a lot of that stuff going on. And you're trying to deliver all of the soft skills, like the tender care, right? Making sure that they're fed and clothed and clean and happy and as happy as they can be. And then this also very logistical, practical side of care. But I think what people don't talk about enough is the emotional and spiritual side of care, that you, particularly in our situation, because he didn't have a long-term life partner, I effectively became his person. If he was still with my mum or had any long-term partner, that person would have absorbed a lot of what I absorbed. But when you are not in that situation and they don't have that person, I think that their children take on a really different role. And that certainly was the case for us. So, I think the spiritual and emotional distress that comes with walking somebody to their death is something that we just don't talk about enough. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you have a good, close, strong relationship, we had always had a really strong relationship, very open, had always kind of talked about everything. And so, in order to hold space for him, I've heard a lot of other people say things like, oh, my dad was so stoic. He would have never let me know that he was struggling. And I feel proud of the fact that Dad and I had such, I think this is the reason, such a close relationship that he felt like he could unravel with me. Perhaps in a way that he couldn't do with my younger siblings because they are a lot younger than me. And I have one who's older, but she lives in America. So she wasn't here. And I felt grateful that he felt like he could unravel with me and be frightened and tell me that he didn't want to die, and all of those things that are really hard to hear and hard to hold for somebody, but that I also felt quite privileged to get to witness his full humanity in that.
It's a good point, and I guess a unique, not unique to you, but I guess we don't see it often. Often there's your spouse, long-term partner, as you mentioned, but when that falls to you as a child, yeah, that's an interesting dynamic, because I guess often it would fall onto the spouse, so that the child would not have that put on them.
Mm-hmm.
For someone in that position, what advice would you give to them if they were going through something similar to yourself? Not necessarily specific to you're the child carer, but maybe with a parent that has been given a finite time to live, whatever the condition or injury or illness. What advice would you give to someone that's facing death and, as you said, unraveling a little bit, health wise?
Oh, I'm writing things down frantically because I've got so much that I want to say
Okay.
about this.
Yeah.
So the first thing is that I don't think we have a really good understanding of this sense of anticipatory grief. So the grief that comes not from getting a phone call saying that somebody has gone and they've gone now, which to be fair, I haven't really experienced with somebody who's very close to me. I've had plenty of those calls about people who weren't that I knew and knew well, but certainly not in the case of a parent or a dear a person that's in my sort of immediate circle. So I don't think we talk about anticipatory grief enough. We have this idea that we have in the movies of grief, which is that at the funeral everyone wears black, and that's when the grieving commences. And in my experience, that wasn't it at all. In fact, I think I started grieving Dad as soon as I got that phone call, to be fair. I remember Googling, I put him on speakerphone and quickly Googled the prognosis for mesothelioma. And I wouldn't recommend that, but because I had been a health journalist for 15 years at that point, I knew very quickly which sources were reputable and which I should look at. And I will never forget my eyes kind of glancing from link to link, seeing, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, fatal, incurable, rapidly progressing, all the stuff that you don't want to see, right? So I think I knew immediately that I was going to lose him and I was going to lose him soon. And that didn't mean that I couldn't hold optimism. I prefer optimism over hope. I could absolutely hold optimism for him and try to extend his time as much as possible, which is absolutely what I did. That was my sole objective. But I knew that I was going to lose him and lose him quickly. And so did me leaning into the anticipatory grief help when I was on the other side of that? I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that I feel like once he had passed, I grieved pretty well. And what I mean by that is it didn't fall in a hole or in a heap. And I think partially that was because I had known for a long time that I was going to lose him. I never let myself believe anything else. And I saw the time that we had as a total bonus. I call myself the eternal pessimist. And what I mean by that is if you tell me someone has 6 to 12 months, I hear and believe 6 at best. And that spurs me into action to take all of the time, say all of the things, go and have second breakfast just because we could, swim at the beach on a Tuesday when everybody else is at work because why not? I really, really leaned into that experience. And so that's what I mean by that, is that I think that anticipatory grief, the great death walkers in this country will say you always set a place for death at the table, you just don't feed it. So death is always a possibility for all of us, whether you've got a terminal diagnosis or not. I suppose the silver lining of a poor prognosis or a terminal diagnosis is that somebody started a clock for all of us a long time ago, and none of us have any idea what the balance is on the clock. When you get a terminal diagnosis or a prognosis, and I'm saying this from the perspective of the person who has never received that, and I can only imagine, and I don't really want to imagine what that must feel like. But as a bystander, what it signaled to me was that somebody has told you how much time is left on the clock and that you can live accordingly. And I think that that is a real gift if you have the time to be able to say the things and do the things and make amends if you need to. So I think that that's really important. I as a general rule, I think human beings are really frightened of suffering. We're frightened of our own suffering. We're frightened of the people that we care about suffering. And I totally understand that. And I also think that part of my mission on this planet is to share with people that suffering is hard. It's awful. It's going to take every single bit of you that you have got to give and then some. And if you can lean into that experience, you will experience transformation and magic and growth and time, our most precious commodity, with this person that you love that you will never get back. So from where I sit, there is equally, if not more, to gain from going through this experience than there is to lose. That's just my perspective, and not everybody will feel like that, and certainly not all circumstances will align with that. But I think if we can, when somebody gets a diagnosis, I think that if we can just assume that death is absolutely on the table, it's on the cards, it's a possibility. I think if we can allow ourselves to open the door to grief, as I said, set a place for it at the table, just don't feed it, but that it's welcome at the table, in the conversation. I think that that's kind of a powerful place to be. The second thing that I wanted to say about that is that my motto through losing Dad and in the immediate aftermath, and in fact for quite some time afterwards, was gently, gently. And the reason for that was that I think you can feel, especially when it's a parent, or maybe it's only that's my only context, but I suppose it would also apply to, say, a partner. When you lose a parent, I think you can feel a little bit like a turtle without a shell. You're kind of moving through the world differently to how you did before. And life is full of pokey, jabby stresses for all of us. And when you are, vulnerable, no shell, no protection, that's how it can feel. The world can feel kind of like a scary place. So gently, gently means gently on myself and gently through the world around me. If I've got no shell, and so I'm kind of vulnerable moving through the world, I can't be a bull in a china shop anymore. I need to move differently. And so I need to be gentle on myself, loads of self-compassion, but also gently on the world around me, because the world can feel really crunchy when you've lost somebody that you love, and when you're losing somebody that you love. And then the other thing that I wanted to say that I think is important is about this idea of different hats, because it can be really difficult to take a really long-winded way of answering your question. It can be difficult to switch between when you are a child looking after your parent, all of a sudden it's like you've become the parent and they've become the child. And I don't say that to diminish their experience or their years of life or to be disrespectful. What I mean is that all of a sudden, this person that you used to go to frequently when your car would break down, when you wanted to buy a house, when you wanted to understand how the stock market worked, literally anything that went wrong in your life, for a lot of us, our first port of call is to call one of our parents. And when that goes away, that can feel really, really discombobulating. And so when you are in the position, as I was, of being...
This is a paid partnership with BetterHelp. Hey Luke and Ryan, life gets heavy sometimes, especially when grief hits. For me, that weight often shows up as anxiety.
Yeah, it's not always one big thing. Sometimes it's just life piling up, work, relationships, trying to hold it all together. Suddenly, I'm anxious and don't know why.
Totally. I used to think anxiety meant panic attacks, but for me, it's more like overthinking every choice or feeling like I'm never doing enough.
And it can even hit on good days. Out of nowhere, I'm spiraling over things that haven't even happened yet.
It's easy to feel alone in it, but you're not.
That's why we're talking about our paid partner, BetterHelp.
BetterHelp connects you with credentialed therapists who can help manage anxiety and more.
Most people go to BetterHelp for anxiety, and 69% feel better after just 6 weeks.
Getting started is simple. Fill out a quick questionnaire and get matched with a therapist. If it's not a fit, you can switch at any time.
Their support team is super responsive, and with over 7,000 reviews and a 4.3 Trustpilot rating, it's a platform you can count on.
So let BetterHelp help manage your anxiety so it doesn't manage you.
Click the link below or go to betterhelp.com/rememberingthem for 10% off your first month.
Was of being the primary carer for your parent, not only are you witnessing this like physical decline, you're also holding this emotional and spiritual decline, but you are also often being their executor, their power of attorney, their enduring power of attorney, playing those types of roles. You might be advising them, helping them navigate the healthcare system, advocating for them. These are kind of hard skills that you know, and that need application, and it's a really different energy to sit in. So in one given day, I could be with Dad. I could be holding his hand, reading him a book, making him lunch, sitting with him watching a TV show. That's all soft and tender and gooey and lovely. And then in the next breath, I could be on the phone to one of his service providers, chasing some results with the doctor, running to the pharmacy because we've run out of a medication, advocating because he needs a different sort of chair in the shower or whatever it might be. They're two really different skill sets and very different energies to sit in. So I used to do this thing with Dad where I would say like, okay, Dad, I'm putting on my executor hat, and I would mime, for anybody who's listening and not watching, I would mime putting a hat on my head so that he had a segue that what I was about to talk about was administrative, financial, logistical, maybe could feel a little bit insensitive, like we need to talk about death or funeral or super or whatever. But at least it gave him and I a little segue to be able to sit in a different energy, whether he was ready or not, right? Like these are really hard conversations to raise with somebody. Like, hey, Dad, can we talk about what happens after you die? You know, you don't know when that person's ready to have that conversation with you. So they can be difficult to raise. And I think being mindful of these kind of quite separate roles and finding a way, whether it's my way with the hats or whatever, but finding a way to be able to change gears between those roles, I think is really important. So yeah, hard hat for hard chat is what I like to say.
That's fantastic. If I can summarize those points and just fill in the gaps or correct me if I'm wrong on any of those. So it was the lean in hard, and understand, bring death to the table, but don't feed it. It was the gently approach, and then wearing different hats. Has that wrapped it up in a nice little bow, I guess, from what you just spoke about? Yeah.
And well done, because if you had have asked me to wrap them up, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what I'd said.
I'm glad you wrote those down, and I'm glad you went through them, because I feel like you could just clip that up and say anybody that's in a position where they're about to or will be experiencing anticipatory grief, there you go. That I wish I had that, you know, when Dad was given his diagnosis. That was phenomenal. Well done. Thank you for sharing that. Switching gears now, Jack, as a person, how would you describe him to a complete stranger?
I love this question. Dad, I would say Dad was somebody who coloured outside of the lines. So there are 5 of us to 4 different women. So he was this incredibly physically beautiful, 6'3", kind of Croatian background, physically gorgeous. Still to this day, and bear in mind, I've been a health journalist for 20 years now. I've interviewed hundreds, if not close to 1,000, incredibly clever experts. And I would say he's probably by far the smartest person I have ever met. He had this magnificent brain. And as we tend to see, I think, with people with magnificent brains, he also came with some fairly magnificent struggles with his own self-doubt, his own mental equilibrium or health, and addiction, and the attention of women, was something that he came very naturally to him, as you can probably imagine. And so, I like to say about Dad that he was as human as they come. And what I mean by that is that he was brilliant and fantastic and kind and generous, and also difficult and selfish and hard work, and like the rest of us, as multifaceted as they come. So, he definitely was the apple of my eye. But I suppose as I got older, I could see some of his, I suppose you could call them quote unquote shortcomings, that, only humanized him more to me. And I see them in everybody. I see them in myself, in my husband, in my mother, in my children. Like that's not a critique of him at all. It's just the truth about who all of us are. So he was brilliant, in a word, and I adored him.
Him as a dad, Casey, how would you describe him as a dad? What are some of your memories of him?
And it's interesting because I think if you asked all of my siblings this, you'd probably get a slightly different answer. And I think that, they say that each of our children has a different parent, right? Because we show up differently to parent each of our children. And especially I think for him, my older sister is 52. I'm 42. My brother is 27. My sister is 22. And my brother is 21 in November. So there is a pretty significant age gap between us. So my answer is that he was incredibly present, and he tried really hard. I remember he would drive from, he never stayed with any of our parents for a long period of time. So broke up with all of them when we were pretty young. But I remember distinctly him driving over to my little sister's house and picking her up at 4:45 or some stupid o'clock in the morning, and driving her 4 minutes from her house. So he would drive for like 30, 40 minutes from his house to get to her house at silly o'clock in the morning. She would get in the car, and, a grunty, grumbly teenager, as we all were, I would have been exactly the same, would get in the car, and he would drive her 4 minutes from her house to go to water polo training and wait there for her, and then drive her home again the 4 minutes. And he said to me that sometimes she wouldn't say a word to him on either leg. But that was his way of showing up and being there for her. He did the same with my little brother with footy. I think he tried really hard. And as I said, my siblings would all probably have different answers to that. But from my perspective, he tried really hard. When I was born, look, I think in some ways, myself and my littlest brother got the best of Dad for various reasons, just timing of life. He was 29 when I was born, and, had been struggling with addiction, and really sort of saw me as a bit of a turnaround, and started studying child psychology, and went and worked in a daycare center to become the very best dad that he could possibly be to me. And I interviewed him a lot since he got sick, and then wrote a book about it. And in one of those interviews, I'll never forget him saying that, my relationship with Casey is such a beautiful one, and I feel really proud of the person that she has become because I poured all of that time and energy into her as a very little person. And I suppose that was sort of my mentality with the other end of life for him, was that he walked me into this life and I walked him out of his. And that felt like a really fair trade to me. I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be on the planet, obviously, without him. So that felt like I'd do it all again in a heartbeat, in this lifetime and every single every single one to come. So as a dad, I would say he was present and generous of spirit and always did his best, even if that didn't align with somebody else's version of the best. I believe he truly, truly always did his best.
It's an interesting point, especially given the time span between the different siblings, and I'd be interested how your siblings saw him as a dad. I'm sure they had different. I'm just thinking myself, if I was a parent in my late 20s, would have been absolutely hopeless to be slightly better in my 30s and then a little bit more prepared now in my 40s. So
Yeah.
yeah, super interesting that different dynamic and different way of I guess life stage for him as a dad, and then also on your side as the child, the view, your view as him as a father compared to your siblings would be super interesting.
Yeah, and I think probably the headline on that, and I never want to speak on their behalf, right?
Mhm.
But I suppose the headline on that is probably exactly as you said, which is that I think our life stage, our age and stage does play a huge hand in how well we are able to show up and parent. Also bearing in mind the fact that there is a secondary party here. So there is always a mother who, and mothers traditionally tend to take ownership of children when a couple splits. Ownership is definitely not the right word, but you know what I mean. And so I think in a lot of those situations, he didn't have the access to that child in the way that he would have liked to, for one reason or another. Two of the situations was geographically. One's mother picked her up and took her to America, and he wasn't in a position to travel to and from America. And so access was really difficult, very, very different time. We're talking 50
Yeah.
years ago, where there's no WhatsApp, no Instagram, no Zoom, none of that. So it was very difficult to connect. And so, yeah, I think geographically it could have been difficult. And also, I just think, relationships are hard, and particularly when they break down and there's young children involved, they can be really, really challenging to navigate. And so I suspect that might be some of the through line, is that whilst I felt he was incredibly present, super generous, I also can appreciate that wasn't always the experience felt by others. And that's, I guess, why I say I genuinely think he always tried his best. Any kind of absence or distance or any of that was purely because circumstances didn't allow, for one reason or another. It was never ever for lack of love or lack of effort or lack of trying. It just sometimes circumstantially, I could totally understand how they would feel like that. So I don't take
Yeah.
away from that for a second. But
Yeah.
relationships are hard. Human beings are complicated. And that's one of the silver linings of losing somebody over a period of time, is that you do have this window where you are able to have conversations with them about, you can make amends if you need to, and you can say the things that you need to, and you've got time, and that is a real gift.
Yeah. What are some of those favorite? Do you have some stories or memories of your dad, either growing up or whether it was post-diagnosis or a couple
Yeah,
of different
yeah,
ones? Yeah.
yeah, loads. I remember when he was teaching me multiplication, he got like 1,000 little toothpicks with Australian flags on them, probably from like the dollar store for a Australia Day party or something. And I remember we had this what felt like a huge dining table, but probably was very standard sized dining table. I was just very little. I think I must have been 5 or something. And I remember him laying out what must have been hundreds, well, that's what it felt like to me in my memory, of these tiny little Australian flags and grouping them into different amounts to teach me multiplication. Just these really visual tools that, really set me quite far ahead of the rest of my class. He did invest a lot of time in me in terms of, writing and reading and math and science, and this real kind of curiosity and hunger for knowledge. So, when I was little, and I suppose this is part of the experience of having split parents, is that I lived half the week with mum and half the week with dad from when I was very little until I was probably 13. And so it's this really formative time where I was having quite intense one-on-one time with him, which was so beautiful for our relationship, and I think really set us up well. I mean, my house was full of animals. I was obsessed with animals. So I think at one point we had a dog, a cat, a sheep, in the suburbs of Perth, which was totally not allowed. 20 budgerigars, quails, rabbits, any pet that I wanted, we got somehow. I've got no idea how. We never had any money. We would scratch around in the couch for coins to buy petrol. Like, he never had any money, but somehow he made it feel like this kind of adventure rather than ever a stress. So I've got lots of memories like that from when I was little. And I think post-diagnosis, one of my favorite memories is that because I'm a journalist, I'm a storyteller, and I knew when I was going to lose him that I wanted to tell his story to him to help him make sense of these. I think when we're living in these very ad hoc chapters, it can feel as though none of them make sense and they don't fit together. And I think it's only when you look back retrospectively and perhaps somebody tells the story back to you that you can see that there actually is so much good here. You were so loved and you loved so hard and you achieved some really magical things for somebody who never at all, like climbed the corporate ladder or picked a field and stuck to it. He kind of jumped from one thing to the other. And I think that for him, I put together this 40-minute documentary for him where I interviewed his friends and his family and put music and found footage and, tried to piece it all together for him. And sitting on his bed, I will never forget it, sitting on his bed, both wearing his socks because it was kind of cold, it was winter in Perth, and eating vanilla ice cream, his favorite, with Maltesers on top, also his favorite, and showing him this thing that I had labored over for probably a year. It had taken me, hundreds and hundreds of hours to put together, and being able to sit there with him and see it land on him was one of the most amazing moments of my life, because I think that we all want our lives to mean something. We all want our hardships to mean something, and we all want to leave the world a little bit better than we found it. And so, for Dad, I think his legacy was really his 5 children, and to show him how much we all loved him, that there were interviews of all of us and his parents and his sister and his girlfriend and, his best friend. And, I think that to be able to see it all come together like that and explain the things that he had achieved through the lens of other people who love him dearly, he said to me afterwards, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and he said to me, and I quote because it will never leave me, he said, "You are a marvel. You are a giant human. You have helped me feel proud of my life and I cannot thank you enough." And that was the greatest gift that he could ever give me, because it was exactly the effect that I wanted it to have. It wasn't for show to anybody else. He ended up showing it to lots of other people after that because he was so proud of it, which was beautiful. And I cut a small section out and we showed it at his celebration of life. But by and large, it was just for him. And to get to see it land on him in the way that I wanted it to was very, very, very meaningful for me.
The Remembering Them podcast is supported by My Legacy Message. How do you want to be remembered? My Legacy Message provides a service that delivers a personalized keepsake video to your loved ones, often as a surprise after you pass. My Legacy Message, be remembered.
For me and for him.
That's absolutely amazing. But what drove you to put that together and put that working? Was it life experience, work experience? Was it you saw something that was put together? What drove you to do that? Because it's phenomenal.
Look, it's a good question. I think, I've always been a capturer. So has Dad. I've got a garage full of his journals to prove it. I've always captured. So back in the day, it would be, notebook and pen. Then later it became writing on my laptop, publishing articles. And these days, it's lots of voice notes in my phone and video and photos. And I've always been interested in capturing the human experience. And so as soon as I knew that I was going to lose him, which was the day that I got that phone call, I think I probably decided there and then that I was going to try to capture and then retell back to him some part of his story, because I don't know, it felt like the most meaningful, purposeful work of my life, that if I could deliver to this man who had given me so much, if I could deliver to him something that made him feel like, okay, I've really achieved something here, and I can leave this place with way less spiritual distress than I could see he was currently feeling, because he felt ripped off, and I get it. I felt ripped off too. He didn't feel like it was fair to have potentially 2 more decades ripped away from him, to be a grandfather, to see his younger children grow up. I'm super mindful that I lost Dad when I was 39, and I got to do all of the big things with him. He saw me graduate from university, find a career that I love, achieve some level of success, meet the man who would become my husband, walk me down the aisle to him, watch me become a mother, see me find some sense of happiness and self-assuredness that he had struggled to grasp for his entire life. So I know he was incredibly proud of me, that he, really liked me as well as loving me, which I think says a lot about our relationship, and vice versa. He was my favorite person. And so I think, I don't know exactly the answer to what compelled me. All I know is that I have always written to make sense of my experiences and the world around me. And as a journalist, I share those experiences in the hope that somebody finds some comfort or some guidance in them. That my words can find wounds that are in the same shape, and to some degree help to heal them. That's the goal.
I will say, I think, and you summarised it perfectly in the quote that your dad left you with, but for someone that has an opportunity to do that with someone else that's nearing end of life is such an amazing gift, because I think a lot of people, you'll hear those stories, but it'll often be at the funeral. So for someone to receive that and I think get some sort of recognition that they're leaving the world in a better place is amazing. Because I think deep down, just my opinion is, we all want to feel that we've made some sort of impact and left the world in a better place. We've impacted people or the world in a positive way. So the fact that you were able to wrap that up and gift that to him is just phenomenal. I wanted to ask, did you ever, in the post-diagnosis, flip the camera and have those conversations with your dad and get some answers that'll live on forever?
Yes, I did. I definitely did. I mean, I've got hours and hours of interview footage of him. And really the intention there was to leave my siblings with something, because I felt like I knew Dad really intimately. I felt like he and I had never had secrets. We'd always been really honest with each other, probably, too honest with each other. And I felt like my little siblings were going to be robbed of that, and they absolutely were. And so, I've got one interview that went for like 3 hours, where I sat him on a chair and pointed the camera in his direction. We had to take a lunch break. It went for so long. And it was I got to ask him, and that was when he was still really well. So it wasn't right towards the end where he was really struggling. He was still really well. And so I asked him all about, we think that we know our parents really intimately, and then we actually don't have the information captured anywhere. What was their relationship like with their parents? What was the first home that they grew up in? What was their school experience like? Who were their best friends? How did they meet their partner? What did it feel like on the day that your child was born? who was a mentor who really helped you through? Like, we don't know that stuff. And if we do, we certainly don't capture it so that we can remember it. So being able to do that with him while he was still really well and really get all of that stuff down. And not only that, not only the, the logistics of it, but the fears around it and the opportunities around it and the feelings around it, that felt beautiful and, a real gift, I suppose, because I guess what I was foreseeing was that my siblings one day are going to go through all of the things that I got with him without him. My little sister's going to walk down the aisle and he's not going to be there. My little brothers are going to become parents maybe, and he's not going to be there, and they're not going to be able to call him to say, I need to work this out, help me. And so I tried to ask him all of the questions that I thought they might want to know in the future, all about his history, but also like, what would you do in this situation? What do you do in that situation? So that if they ever want to draw on that and get to know him really well as the 66-year-old man he was at that point in time, and that they are more mature and more ready to reap the benefits of having those conversations, appreciate their one-way conversations. But I guess that was what I was trying to achieve. So yes, I've got heaps and
Yeah,
heaps.
that's awesome.
I feel like I really bottled him up. If you can bottle someone up, I bottled him up. And like, the reason that I can share with you that quote that he said to me after watching the video was because I have a dad notes section in my phone, and I have dates, times, quotation marks, exactly what he said, not as a running commentary, but when he said something that was important or difficult or touching or whatever, I captured it immediately, because memory is a fickle friend and we don't remember things in the way that we would like to, or even in the way that they occurred. And so I think for me, I don't trust my memory, and I really wanted a real record of those things so that I could draw on them later and them never feel fuzzy.
Yeah. Really smart to do that, because I think as we get older, those memories do start to fade. Whether it is those direct quotes or whatever it might be, to even stories and memories of our loved ones. So the fact that you've A, written it down, B, recorded it, it means that that legacy can live on. And speaking of that, how do you and the family continue Jack's legacy moving forward, or how will you continue his legacy moving forward?
Yeah, we have been pretty good at getting together. When it's his birthday, or when it's we did do his anniversary for the first couple of years, and then I think I've decided not to keep doing that, because really the anniversary isn't what we want to celebrate. It's his birthday and the good days, the special days. But we have, I think, we place a lot of emphasis on the big days, the anniversary, the birthday, the Christmas, particularly in that year of firsts, as they call it. And I guess what I have realized is that the much more meaningful commitment to honoring his legacy is simply us spending time together. So when I get together with my siblings and we are sitting around having a chat, I think to myself, he would love this. He would love that we are together just on a Tuesday night. My little brother's in his footy gear because he's come straight from training, and my other brother's got his new girlfriend there with us, and Dad would love to be here to meet her, and he would love that we are all sitting around gas bagging until 9:30 at night, when I have to tell them to leave because I'm a grandmother and I go to bed at very, very early. I think that those are the bits that I think we get tripped up by, the commitment to the big things, to the anniversary, to showing up and doing it really well. And actually, I think it's the little bits in between that I think are actually, for me, they feel more connective and better. To give you another example, on my mother-in-law's birthday every year, we lost my mother-in-law in 2019 to brain cancer, and very different experience. So 6 weeks from diagnosis to death. So really quick, like whiplash quick. And that was so incredibly difficult for my husband. But every year on her birthday, all of us, so one family, we're in Perth, Her other son is in Sydney, and her long term partner, my husband's stepfather, is in Canberra, where they live together. All three families make her trademark signature lasagna. We put it in the oven, and at 5 o'clock Perth time and 7 o'clock their time, we all sit on Zoom and eat our lasagnas together once a year. And we've been doing it now since she passed away in 2019. And that feels beautiful and special, and it doesn't always work perfectly. Sometimes the kids are difficult and nobody's sitting at the table, and but the fact that we have maintained that and kept it up and stuck together to continue to honor her. Like, I just think about her looking down on that and just thinking, like, that is so special and
Be
so cool
smiling.
that
Yeah, she'd be loving that.
totally,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
So I think it's those little things that you can do, much more so than the big ones.
Yep. I absolutely agree with that. Couldn't agree more. Casey, one final question for you for the main part of the podcast. Often our most difficult one, and given it's been fairly recent, 2.5 years since Dad has passed. Take care with answering this question. Be gentle with yourself. Be kind. Remembering that I'm trying to think of the analogy of the turtle without a shell on with answering this question. If Dad was in front of you today, what would you say to him?
I would say, we did it. And what I mean by that is Dad's motto was to live and die with ease and grace. And I can't answer whether or not he felt like he lived with ease and grace. That's something that only he can answer. But I will say that as far as deaths go, and not that I have a huge amount of experience in that space, but as far as deaths go, even though getting there was pretty rough, the last couple of months in particular were pretty rough, the actual dying part was incredibly graceful on his part. And I would say I'm so proud of you for showing up to that experience, to the ultimate experience, with that much grace, and that you tried so hard to stay. And I'd say you did it. You really brought everything that you had to that experience. And I heard this saying once that a grandparent's role is to teach their grandchildren how to die. And my children were there when my dad died. They were in the apartment with us. They weren't in the room, but they were in the apartment, and came in and saw him afterwards and gave him a big hug. And my eldest, who was only, God, 5 at the time, wanted to stay and wash his body. Like, she really wanted to be involved. But I think that it's more than that. I think that a parent's role is to teach their children how to die. And if I can take a leaf out of his book, I only hope that I can show up to that experience in my own life with as much humility and humanity and effort and compassion and grace as he did.
Amazing. I think you'd love hearing that, and be super proud to, I guess, hear that he showed up in that way, and you could recognize that. Casey, thank you so much for giving up your time. I'm so positive that anyone listening to this story, and I mentioned it through the conversation, that I could have clipped up that bit around anticipatory grief and how did you do it and how to do it, and that could be a handbook for someone. So I have no doubt that the conversation today will help someone that is going through something or will potentially go through something in the future. Thank you very much for giving up your time and joining us on the podcast today and remembering Jack.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So, listeners, that was Casey from Perth in Western Australia, the other side of the country. Such a privilege having her on the podcast and sharing stories and memories of her dad, Jack, and her experience. I think there's so much to unpack there, but I just want to say that Casey did that so well. Not the conversation, of course, the conversation, but the anticipatory grief side of things, the post grief side of things, she has seemed to have done that so much better than I did when where Dad was given his diagnosis, and the situation that we went through, and Luke can probably speak to that a lot more because he was probably closer to being that caring person for Dad in that situation. But Casey absolutely knocked it out of the park. And I know that she said at the end of the recording that she would say to her dad that we did it. She had a huge hand in that and can be absolutely proud of herself. And as I mentioned in the conversation, I'd love to snip up that piece of advice that she gave to people. I think anyone that is in a situation where they are experiencing anticipatory grief, is that the bits of information Casey gave is so invaluable. So thank you very much, Casey, for giving up your time. Really appreciate it. I'm sure it will help someone else out there. And if you have enjoyed this conversation with Casey, please share the podcast, this episode and any other of our conversations to anyone that you think would benefit out of her story or anyone else's story and might help them through a situation of grief. Reminder to give the podcast a rating and review on your preferred podcast platform. Ideally 5 stars. That would really help us show up on anyone searching for a grief-related conversation. Reminder that we have the partnerships. So we have the BetterHelp partnership, betterhelp.com/remembering them. 10% off your first month subscription if you do need to speak to a credentialed therapist. Also the My Legacy Message service, mylegacymessage.com.au, where you can leave a video message to your loved ones, often a surprise after you pass. And again, relating back to Casey, she did that so well and was just ahead of the game, beat us to it, that's for sure. But sitting down with her dad and recording on one side with friends and family and siblings, but also I did speak to her on the Patreon about flipping the camera and talking to him and getting recordings of Dad that she has now forever, and to ensure his legacy lives on. So mylegacymessage.com.au for that. Reminder to follow us on all of our socials, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok and Instagram being our main one. Please give us a follow and a share on there. And we look forward to the next conversation. Look forward to having Luke and Ryan back with the next conversation as well. One final reminder, actually, before I forget, the Patreon. Had a great conversation with Casey on the Patreon chat as well. Exclusive recordings for our members, $6 a month US, about $9 a month Australian. To access for those exclusive chats, we dived a little bit more into Casey's conversations with her dad and bits of advice that she has learned from him, and also the experience of grief. So please jump on our Patreon. And also there's a lot of free content on there as well. If you follow us on patreon.com/remembering them podcast or download the app. A lot of free content as well for weekly conversations that we're having as well. So please jump on to Patreon, a way to support the podcast. Appreciate you giving up your time and listening to this conversation with Casey today, and look forward to the next one. Thank you. Love you. Bye.
The Remembering Them podcast is created for entertainment purposes. Mark, Ryan, and Luke are not licensed mental health professionals. If you would like to discuss your mental well-being, several resources are available in Australia. Information about these services are available in the podcast notes. Please take the time to contact your loved one today and tell them how much you appreciate and love them.